is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Are the prices of Tesla's cars about to be cut again? Investors react as Elon Musk's comments overshadow quarterly results.
Our other headlines: Turkey raises interest rates, but it falls short of what the markets had wanted.
China's President Xi Jinping greets former top United States diplomat Henry Kissinger, the man credited with bringing the two countries together in the 1970s.
Going hungry in Hungary. The food banks feeding families to help them through the cost of living crisis.
And out of this world, China's Shenzhou 16 astronauts complete their first spacewalk. Tesla CEO Elon Musk says further price cuts to some of its models could be on the cards.
During the electric car maker's earnings call, Musk told investors that one day the world economy appears to be falling apart, while the next it's fine, adding that he didn't know what the hell was going on. Tesla shares fell more than 4% in after-hours trading on the back of the disappointing results. Well, let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. So he doesn't know what the hell's going on. What is going on with Tesla?
I know. I know, and if he doesn't know, how do you expect me to know? I mean, for goodness sake. But he's right, though. He's on the money, as he always is, in these conference calls. Because I tell you something, we've been told that there's a recession coming for the last, year, 18 months. And I don't think there is a recession coming. No one seems to believe it anymore, which is why the markets are rallying very strongly at the moment, which we'll get to a bit later on. Good old Elon Musk. Well, here's the thing. We've moved from banking at the beginning of the second quarter earnings season to technology now. And it's funny because the two are completely different. With banking, we were told, oh, it's going to be very bad. And it turned out to be very good. Or at least not bad. And then with technology, we were told it's going to be very good, it's going to be fantastic, and it's turned out to be okay. So regarding Tesla, what can I tell you? The earnings per share came in at adjusted 91 cents, not 82 cents. And the revenue was 24.93 billion, not 24.48 billion. So, you've got a double beat there from Tesla. The problem, though, is that they cut prices recently, okay? And they scored on that by increasing their deliveries. The trouble is, they cut into their margins. So now every car they make, every vehicle they make, they're making a bit less money than they might have done otherwise. And that's the problem. And as you heard, apart from saying, I don't know what the hell's going on, which is a wonderful quote, he also suggested that there may be more price cuts coming. And that's why Tesla shares are down today. There's also a bit of an EV boom going on here at the moment, but it's not forecasted to last. That's the thing, not forecast to last. So this is all part of the problem. And the other thing you have to remember is that when we were just making diesel engines 100 years ago, diesel and petrol engines 100 years ago, there were hundreds of companies in America doing that. And now we have 3 in Detroit, and one of those is owned by the Europeans. So this is going to happen with the EV makers as well. And it's a battle to work out which one is going to survive. Now, I think Tesla probably will be one of those, but many of them will fall by the wayside. Anyway, for all those reasons, Tesla shares are now down 7% after the top-line success yesterday. It's always what you read into the documentation and then what Musk says on the call that actually matters. Guys?
OK, well, that's Tesla. Let's talk about the telly. Some rather mixed news for Netflix after their password-sharing crackdown.
The flicks. I love talking about the flicks. I really do. I don't know whether these numbers mean anything to anybody, but I'm going to just recite them anyway. So their earnings were $3.29, not $2.86. That's good. The revenue was $8.19 billion, not $8.30 billion. That's not good. So that was a mixed set of earnings from the flicks. However, their subscribers skyrocketed like we haven't seen before. I was on the air live yesterday when the numbers were coming through, and I suggested on the air, I said, I think the subscriber numbers are pretty good. And our producer, Isabella, said, it's 5.89 million. I said, oh my God, that's incredible, because we were only expecting on Wall Street 2.09 million. So there are many, many more subscribers than expected. And the password thing is now being rolled out globally. So anybody watching this program, look me in the eye on the television now and tell me you are not, or you never have, shared a password with these companies, particularly Netflix, because we all know you do. And the password crackdown is happening globally now. So if you're living and watching in a country where it's not yet, where the Netflix police are not prominent, you could well have a knock on your door any day now. That's a warning. But the problem with Netflix is, how do you grow the business? See, that's the thing. With all those additional subscribers, I mean, there's almost nowhere to go. So it can't be subscribers, or it probably can't. The password crackdown, well, that should bring in some extra revenue. So it really leaves them with adjusting the tiers that you pay in order to get access to Netflix, and whether you choose advertising or not, or how much advertising you choose, all that kind of stuff. But Netflix is warning today, this is not going to happen in one quarter. Okay, it's going to happen over several quarters, maybe even a year or two. And on top of that, you can now trowel on the Hollywood strike. So for all those reasons, Netflix is down quite a lot now, 9%. That's quite a bit for them.
John never shared his Netflix password. Terrett, thank you.
I'm sure he told us he had.
He has confessed on air. We have it. We do have a full confession from him, available to you, John, at a small cost, of course.
Now, EasyJet has reported record quarterly profits thanks to an ongoing rebound in summer travel demand. Britain's budget airline posted a profit of more than $260 million in Q3, showing that holidaymakers are undeterred by the heat waves sweeping across Europe. The company says growth in bookings is predicted to continue into the winter.
Wall Street banks paid out more than $1 billion in the first half of this year as part of severance packages for their employees. Among those banks is American multinational Goldman Sachs, which spent $260 million after laying off 3,400 of its workforce. Morgan Stanley spent more than $300 million.
Swedish energy giant Vattenfall has shelved plans for a major wind farm off the coast of England, blaming soaring inflation. The company says the development, known as the Boreas project, is now unviable. Boreas would have produced enough electricity to power 1.5 million homes. Vattenfall says the UK could struggle to meet its wind targets without improved incentives.
Turkey's central bank has raised interest rates by 250 basis points, putting it at 17.5%, far below what the analysts were expecting.
Our correspondent Louise Greenwood reports.
Thursday's decision by Turkey's central bank falls far short of what markets have been calling for. Economists say the move brings the country no closer to cooling prices or dealing with a cost of living crisis that's brought misery to millions. It's the second rate decision since President Erdogan appointed his new economic team, in the form of Finance Minister Mehmet Şimşek and Central Bank Governor Hafiz Gaye Erkan. The pair took up office in the new AKP administration, promising a return to what Şimşek called rational economic policy. Last month, the central bank seemed to follow through on that promise, doubling interest rates from 8.5% to 15%. But in the wake of Thursday's much more modest increase, some are questioning if the pair have the mandate from the president to deliver on the reform that they've promised. Erdogan, a long-term opponent of interest rates, which he's called un-Islamic, returned from his 3-day Gulf visit this week with multi-million-dollar investment contracts signed. Turkey watchers say it's more evidence that the president plans to prioritise growth over more conventional fiscal management. Erdogan won an unprecedented third decade in power in May's election, promising voters a host of benefits, including higher salaries and better pensions for public sector workers and free supplies of natural gas for a month. Many international investors, particularly in Western markets, fear that ahead of local elections next year, another unfunded public spending spree by the government may be on the way. Until then, consumers are still faced with escalating prices, far beyond what most people's wages and pensions can afford. Louise Greenwood, CGTN.
Well, let's talk now to Timothy Ash, who's an economist at Blue Bay Asset Management. Good to have you back on the programme, Timothy. So any expectations that President Erdogan would reverse his unorthodox approach to the economy seem to have rather gone out of the window if this recent rate rise is anything to go by?
Well, it's a bit mixed. I mean, he was cutting rates and wanting rates lower. The central bank has hiked rates. I mean, 650 basis points plus another 250. You know, that's fairly significant, but it's not enough. I mean, inflation is 38%. Policy rates are now 17.5%, massively negative real interest rates. And in the end, you know, if you're serious about fighting inflation, you need to have positive real interest rates. And the danger, you know, they're vulnerable because they've also got a very large negative net international reserve position. They need to rebuild reserves, and given this move on the interest rate is very modest, there will be continued pressure on the exchange rate, which makes it difficult to rebuild reserves.
So inflation at 38%, the central bank wants to bring it down to 5% in the medium term. Is that simply unrealistic?
Well, medium term, I mean, if the medium term is between 1 and 5 years, maybe at the end of the 5-year period, it's possible. The last time the central bank met its inflation target of 5% was in 2011, 12 years ago. They're a long way from that. Expectations are that inflation in the short term will increase from 38% to maybe 50 or 55%, because we've seen a big exchange rate weakness or weakening since the elections in May, and that there's going to be more exchange rate pass-through. So, you know, the market's kind of disappointed. They expected more. The message they're selling from the central bank is that they don't want to shock the economy with a much more aggressive rate hike, and they think they can do it gradual. There was a big Middle East support package for Turkey announced yesterday, $51 billion from the UAE, and maybe that makes them confident that that will provide something of a buffer and give them a bit of room to a bit slower in terms of the monetary adjustment.
So you talked about the exchange rate. We saw the currency, the lira, fall after this interest rate rise announcement. What are the prospects for the lira in this current economic climate?
Well, the next couple of months may be a bit better. We're into the tourism season. The current account probably will be in surplus. But with massively negative real interest rates, foreign portfolio investors are certainly not going to invest in Turkish assets, so there won't be a foreign bid for the lira. And as I said, they need to rebuild foreign currency reserves, so that will create their own demand for FX to rebuild those reserves. So, you know, I think the pressure will still be downward on the lira, a pressure towards depreciation, I think, to year end.
Timothy, good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. That's Timothy Ash from Blue Bay Asset Management.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, EU foreign ministers announced $22 billion in aid for Ukraine as its port cities come under attack for a third night.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans, grey rhinos, and unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day, on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. China's President Xi Jinping has told Henry Kissinger that old friends like him won't be forgotten as he met the 100-year-old former US Secretary of State in Beijing.
President Xi greeted Kissinger at the guest house where he was received during his first visit to the country back in 1971. Since then, the veteran diplomat has visited China more than 100 times. Kissinger played a key role in normalizing diplomatic ties between Washington and Beijing, and President Xi has praised his contribution.
The Chinese people never forget old friends, and the name Kissinger will always be associated with China-US relations. The Chinese people will always remember. I hold you in high regard.
Rana Mitter is Professor of History at the University of Oxford, where he's Director of the China Centre.
The meeting between President Xi Jinping of China and former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger is a historic moment. That's literally true, because Henry Kissinger is the last person of significance left who was central to one of the major historical moments of the 20th century, the reopening of the relationship between China and the United States, which, of course, was marked by President Richard Nixon visiting China in 1972, but the secret trips made previously by Henry Kissinger laid the ground for that opening up. And everything that's happened since 1972 in terms of the relationship between the West and China, and the US and China in particular, is a product of that set of meetings, that introduction, that reopening that Henry Kissinger undertook back over half a century ago.
He's 100 years old. These days he's a private citizen. Realistically, what can Kissinger hope to achieve?
I think that what Henry Kissinger is most noted for at the moment as a private citizen is someone who can speak to the highest levels of government, both in the United States and in China. There aren't that many people left or around who can actually undertake that kind of relationship. So it is the case that even though, of course, there's no official role for Henry Kissinger in the US government, and again, it would be unusual for someone at the age of just over 100 to actually have any official position of that sort, he can, I'm sure, speak to the State Department, speak to the White House, speak to the people who really do make decisions in Washington. At the same time, as we see today, he is in a position to visit China and to meet the very highest leader in the Chinese system, and that, of course, is Xi Jinping. So being able to pass messages at that very elevated level and give his own geopolitical analysis, his own geopolitical spin gained from more than half a century of having lived in that world, that's the unique position that Henry Kissinger has.
And how would you characterize this geopolitical relationship between the United States and China just at the moment?
The relationship with the United States and China at the moment is more tense than it has been probably for 60 or 70 years, ever since actually that moment that Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon went with that American delegation to China in 1972, where they met then Paramount leader Mao Zedong and Prime Minister Zhou Enlai. Since then, the relationship in areas from trade to military to security issues has become very tense in many ways, although it's good to see that in the last few months there have been visits by high-level US actors, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen amongst them, coming to try and lower the temperature between both sides. And it may be that Henry Kissinger's visit is another sign that even if the relationship, let's be frank, remains quite cool in many ways, it nonetheless is one where the temperature is being lowered rather than being raised.
Anticipation is building in Algeria's business community after President Tebboun's visit to China, where 19 agreements were signed.
The deals will see more help from China in developing traditional and high-tech fields in Algeria, and Chinese investments in the country are expected to see significant growth. Our correspondent Adel Al-Marouki reports.
Algerian President Abdelmejid Tebboun's first official visit to China has been widely celebrated in his home capital, Algiers. The Algerian business community is eager to see the implementation of the 19 cooperation agreements witnessed by Tebboun and Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing this week. These agreements will facilitate the transfer of Chinese knowledge and technology in several vital fields, including aerospace, agriculture, renewable energy, transportation, scientific research and infrastructure.
These 19 agreements guarantee an economic boost for Algeria and a shift away from relying on hydrocarbons towards new strategic fields such as renewable energy and agriculture. This is essential for our food security, which is currently a significant challenge and an important target for Algeria. We look forward to benefiting from China's know-how as a global leader in technology and communication.
Tebboun's visit marks the 65th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties between China and Algeria, proudly commemorating one of the strongest relationships between China and an Arab nation. Business ties between the two countries have grown significantly since 2014, when Algeria joined the Belt and Road Initiative.
China knows how to work in Algeria well. This is not the first time it has invested here. Chinese investors are accustomed to the nature of the Algerian people. They understand our territories and resources well. We hope to see even more significant developments in future than what we've achieved so far.
This partnership with China gives Algeria the capabilities to join the BRICS group of nations. China is interested in Algeria's membership. The BRICS summit in Johannesburg this August will be decisive for Algeria's membership, or at least remaining a monitoring state. That will open the door for more agreements with China, Brazil, Russia, India and South Africa. This visit enriches these chances.
A BRICS membership is a priority for the Algerian administration. The North African country is implementing a national plan to reduce its economy's reliance on oil and gas. The hydrocarbon industry currently constitutes approximately 45% of the country's GDP. Algeria possesses the 15th largest oil reserves and the 10th biggest gas reserves in the world. Algiers seeks Beijing's assistance to expand its manufacturing capacity, which currently represents only 5% of its economy. Adel Mahroui, CGTN.
Russia has carried out a third night of airstrikes on Ukrainian ports days after it withdrew from the deal allowing grain to be exported from the country.
Several residential buildings were hit in Mykolaiv, injuring at least 19 people, including 5 children. In Odessa, a security guard was killed and at least 8 others hurt. Ukraine's military said 19 missiles and 19 drones were launched overnight, some of which were intercepted.
EU foreign ministers have agreed to supply $22 billion in aid to Ukraine over the next 4 years. They've been meeting in Brussels. Our correspondent Alex Cadier is there for us. Alex, more commitments from Brussels. Give us more detail.
Yeah, as you said, Jamie, it'll be a 4-year package, $22 billion. That is what the European Commission has proposed and what the foreign ministers were discussing today. It is a sign that the European Union wants to show it is dedicated to Ukraine support, to supporting Ukraine, irrespective of how Russia's invasion of the country evolves. It is very much a longer-term commitment. Even if hostilities were to end tomorrow, that package would still be in place to reinforce the Ukrainian armed forces. Now, it won't be the European Union directly financing or directly giving weapons. What it will do, as is a kind of centralizing force, as it often is for those member states, is that when countries like Poland or Lithuania or other EU member states give weaponry or give financing or train Ukrainian soldiers, the cost of that will be reimbursed by the European Union. That is what the system will be. Now, it is in the early stages of that proposal. It will only be discussed again on the 31st of August, after the summer break, by those foreign ministers again, and then over to the finance ministers, who will obviously have to chip in as well. But certainly a dedication of long-term support from the EU to Ukraine.
How has the EU been reacting to the continuing attacks on Ukrainian ports?
Well, Jamie, very strong condemnation from EU officials. We heard from Josep Borrell, the EU's top diplomat, effectively the EU's foreign affairs minister, at the start of this foreign affairs ministers' meeting in Brussels, really setting out the scene for what was going to be discussed. Let's have a listen to what he said earlier today.
It is the third night that massive aerial attacks against Odessa port and infrastructure is causing not only civilian casualties, but a big destruction of the grain storage there. What we already know is that this is going to create a huge food crisis in the world.
And much stronger condemnation from Josep Borrell just a few moments ago at the closing press conference for this Foreign Affairs Ministers meeting. He said that because of Russia pulling out of the Black Sea grain deal, the world faces a man-made problem of food security, and says that President Putin is attempting to starve the world's population to gain money or win his illegal war in Ukraine. Those were Josep Borrell's words. So very strong condemnation. The EU also renewing its sanctions on Russia for an extra 6 months. So the EU's message is very clear, both on military support, on diplomatic support and on political support. They stand by Ukraine for the long haul.
Alex, thank you for that. Our correspondent Alex Carrier in Brussels.
Russia has warned that all ships travelling to Ukraine's Black Sea ports will be considered potential military targets. As Kyiv said, it would set up a temporary shipping route to continue grain exports after Moscow's withdrawal from that grain deal.
President Putin has accused the West of using the deal as a form of political blackmail. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova is in Moscow.
Well, as we understand, the Russian authorities have sent a very strong message to the rest of the world, saying that Russia wants to see the promises that have been made under this Black Sea grain deal actually fulfilled for the Russian Federation. That is, of course, with regards to the memorandum that was signed between the United Nations and Russia, that Russia says has never been implemented. A number of issues, from the SWIFT payment system to insurances, are freight for the Russian vessels. But at the moment, the Russian Federation is sending a very clear message. Without any progress in 3 months, Russia would not be willing to return to this deal. But if those positions and provisions are implemented, that Russia will immediately consider rejoining the Black Sea grain initiative. That's according to the Russian President Vladimir Putin. He was also saying that the other precondition for Russia's return to the deal would be the restoration of what he called the initial humanitarian essence of this grain deal, suggesting that this deal has been actually twisted by the Western countries, while the European companies have been profiting from this deal. And he also stressed that the poorest countries of the world have not received more than 3% of all the grain that has been exported from Ukraine during the duration of this grain deal. And also the Russian president was stressing that at the moment Russia is willing to supply all of the grain that was shipped from Ukraine on the charitable and commercial basis, and it is able to do so to any country that is requesting to do so. So Russia's position here is very clear. Russia wants to see some concrete results with regard to the implementation of its part of the deal. Otherwise, Russia is not interested in returning back to this initiative.
And more of what are being called retaliatory strikes from Moscow. What's the latest there?
Well, that's right. For the third day now, we keep hearing from Russia's Ministry of Defense the confirmation that they are carrying out the strikes against the military targets near the city of Odessa. That's the port city. We have heard that they have been destroying the workshops and the storage facilities in the area of the city of Odessa, as well as Ilychevsk in this Odessa region. Russia insists they have been destroying the fuel storage facilities in the area of the city of Nikolaev. So the ammunition depots and the fuel storages in the area of those port cities have been under the increased shelling from the Russian armed forces. Russia insists it is using the high-precision weapons to eliminate those targets, while all of those designated targets have been destroyed. But also Russia says this is in retaliation for the Ukrainian terrorist act, as Russia describes it, against the Crimean Bridge that took place earlier this week. It killed 2 people who have been buried. They have been from Belgrade region, which is also the region that comes under increased shelling from the Ukrainian side, and orphaned a 14-year-old girl.
Supermarkets across the UK have been told to make their prices clearer to help shoppers compare and find the best deals.
The Competition and Markets Authority says imprecise labelling is confusing to consumers, and it called on the government to tighten the law. Under the current rules, products should be priced per unit. But the CMA discovered a lack of transparency with missing or incorrectly calculated unit pricing information, both in stores and online.
In our new series, Paying the Price, we look at the impact that the cost of living crisis is having on people in Europe. In Hungary, food insecurity is growing. Over the past year, the country's largest food bank association says more families have relied on food donations to make ends meet. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez reports.
Life has been hard for Agnes Farkas since she lost her job more than a year ago. The mother of four worked for years at a small shop that was forced to close down when Hungary's rising inflation and the energy crisis squeezed all its profits. Since then, Farkas has relied on food donations to feed her family.
We get here all the food we need for the week. They also give us diapers and even school supplies. It's a big help for me.
Farkas' family is one of more than 200 that rely on weekly donations from a community food bank in one of Budapest's poorest districts.
For families struggling to put food on their table, grocery stores are no longer an option, so they have to rely on food banks like this one, which are now in turn struggling to meet the growing demand.
Hungary's year-on-year inflation is 21.9%, the highest in the EU. The government blames the Ukraine conflict for the country's economic downturn. Economists disagree, saying Hungary's productivity has slowed and the nation's budget deficit has ballooned, and that has driven up inflation. The rising cost of living and a wave of small business closures has disproportionately hurt those on the lowest incomes.
We hear all kinds of stories when they come for donations. Some families don't have a stable income anymore. Others are single-parent homes with 2 or 3 children and don't earn enough money.
In January of 2022, the government placed price caps on essential food items to try to fight off inflation. But according to Hungary's Food Bank Association, the caps have hurt the donations they used to receive from food chains.
The retailers started to be more cautious and careful in terms of ordering the goods and warehousing the goods, so there is less surplus.
More than 250,000 people receive help from Hungary's Food Bank Association, and that number is rising fast. That's why the group is now reaching out to restaurants and schools for donations, making sure that no food goes to waste. Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN, Budapest.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Record numbers turn out to watch the opening matches in the most eagerly anticipated Women's Football World Cup ever.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Tesla boss Elon Musk warns of more price cuts after its profit margins slipped amid tough competition.
Turkey has raised interest rates, but it falls short of what markets had wanted.
And China's President Xi Jinping greets former top United States diplomat Henry Kissinger, the man credited with bringing the two countries together in the 1970s. Greek authorities are warning of a second heat wave, giving no let-up from the extreme temperatures across the country.
Wildfires around the capital Athens and on the island of Rhodes have destroyed homes and laid waste to vast areas of forest. Italy, France and Poland have sent firefighters to help. Much of Europe has seen days of record-shattering high temperatures, hitting as high as 48 degrees Celsius in some regions. The World Health Organization is calling on governments to do more to identify vulnerable people and prepare healthcare systems for future heat waves.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Athens. Evangelo, we'll talk about the wider European picture in a moment. First, bring us up to date on the situation in Greece.
Well, right now we're standing in the area of Mandra, which is about 30 kilometers northwest of the Greek capital. That's where the wildfire broke out on Monday, and it continues to blaze as we speak right now. There were a few hours during the afternoon that the authorities were able to contain it, but unfortunately it broke out again, and now it's uncontrollable. I'm going to move on the side so the cameraman can show you guys a little bit of the smoke in the distance. You see that white smoke? That is still a fire front, an active fire front. It's one of the largest one in the areas right now. There's a number of helicopters over our head. We're talking about 9 helicopters and 11 aircrafts trying to contain this fire. There are about 250 firefighters on the scene, along with a number of volunteers, but also the foreign firefighters with the exchange program from the European Union. We have about 50 Romanian firefighters also on the ground fighting these fires. Now, unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, they were able to contain the fire, but within a few moments, it happened again. The resurgence of flames happened again. And this is, as meteorologists and scientists are saying, due to the low humidity levels and high temperatures. High temperatures that, as they say, are attributed to climate change, and it's a heat wave that we're expecting again by the end of this week. We spoke to one of those meteorologists, and this is what he had to tell us.
The area surrounding the Mediterranean Sea is a climate change hotspot. More heat waves are expected and more intense ones. It has already become a common event for the past 30 years, and in the years to come it will happen more often and with higher temperatures than before, with the current heat waves the best example.
And that heat wave, last week's actually heat wave, we had on a risk, a high alert. We're expecting for that to end, but the authorities, Civil Protection Ministry, said it's going to stay in place until this next heat wave that we're expecting sometime by the end of this week.
Evangelo, that's the picture for Greece. Can you tell us about the wider European story?
Well, like Greece, Spain, and Italy are quite in a similar fate. We've seen the wildfires rage in the Canary Islands, and high temperatures in parts of southern Spain, 45, 46 degrees Celsius. Now in Italy, we've seen even higher temperatures than that, temperatures close to 48 degrees. And the record of 2021, the 48.8 degrees Celsius, is according to meteorologists and scientists, it's expected to be broken. Now, the authorities there in Italy have closed monuments from 11 to 6 p.m. and advised people not to go out. Now, in the Balkans, though, just north of Greece, the image and the scenes are quite different. For the past 2 days, there were heavy storms, heavy rains. A number of cities were flooded. People actually lost, about 6 people lost their lives due to these extreme storms in Bosnia, in Croatia, in Serbia. and the meteorologists are saying that these quick changes of temperatures and climates are because of the hot temperatures that followed up until now in that area and the low humidity levels. Now, back here in Greece, the authorities are issuing another warning. Everything from the EMS, from fire brigade, and the civil protection is on high alert and is going to remain like this until the end and the beginning of next week. Cooling centers will remain in place, as well as monuments will close down, as we saw the iconic Parthenon closing down between the hours of 12 local time until 5. Now, the issue is going to remain in place also for the wildfires, as the temperatures are going to continue to rise.
Evangelo, thank you for that. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Athens.
3 people have been killed and 5 injured in a shooting in Auckland. The gunman has not been formally identified, but is believed to be a 24-year-old man employed at the construction site where the shooting took place.
New Zealand's Prime Minister Hipkins said the shooting appeared to be the actions of an individual and there was no risk to national security. The incident took place hours ahead of the Women's Football World Cup opening.
Well, there was a minute's silence for the victims of the shooting before today's matches, which featured both the co-hosts.
New Zealand started with a surprise 1-0 win over Norway, while Australia beat the Republic of Ireland, who were playing their first ever game at a World Cup finals. This tournament has been billed as a watershed moment for the women's game.
Well, our correspondent Siobhan McCall is here with us. So how important could these finals be in showcasing just how far the women's game has come?
Yes, Robin, this is a huge moment for the women's game. We've seen such significant progress over the last few years. We've seen stadiums sell out, the Women's European Championship that was won by England, there was record attendances, there's record ticket sales, but the World Cup is a whole nother level. FIFA, the organisers, are predicting that around 2 billion people around the world will watch this tournament. And that would be an 80% increase on the previous tournament in 2019 and a quarter of the world's population. So in terms of visibility, well, wow, in terms of, generating conversations on social media, next generations of fans, next generations of players, and also people that maybe haven't really been interested before might switch on and watch. So it's a great opportunity. Ticket sales have been really strong. Over 1 million, about 1.4 million, and also the prize pot has increased significantly since 2019. It was 30 million 4 years ago, and it's up to $110 million. And also there has been a big milestone, and that's the fact that this is the first Women's World Cup where there'll be a guaranteed minimum salary. It's $30,000 per player, and if they get to the final and win it, it'll be $270,000 per player. So it's a great financial incentive, and it's also a good sign that FIFA are taking positive steps to move towards greater gender equality.
So where are we in terms of that equality with the male game, the men's game?
Well, good question, Jamie. Positive steps, but the truth is that we are very far away. Women are doing the right thing. As I said, they are selling out stadiums. They're generating a lot of interest in the game. They are just not getting on par financially with the men's games. I mentioned earlier 110 million, the prize pot, but let's look at what it was in Qatar for the Men's World Cup last year. Well, it was a lot more. It was 440 million, 4 times as much. Also, the biggest example of where the gap is in the average annual salaries. So we're going to take the English League as an example, the English top flight. The Women's Super League, it's around $50,000 a year for a women's player. The men's closer to 4 million. And it just carries on right up to the top players. So Sam Kerr is one of the world's best women's players. She's also the top earner. She's on a really good salary. It's $500,000. But compare that to Cristiano Ronaldo, the world's best paid men's player, who is on $200 million. They're just worlds apart. And you know what? People will say, oh, but the men's game's been around longer, it's more established, there's better revenue. And they're all good points. But what people feel is a frustration. They feel that no matter what women's footballers are doing at the moment, they're just not being taken quite seriously enough. We've seen rows over bonuses. For example, in the England women's camp, they're not getting paid a bonus. They were the ones that won the trophy last year, whereas the men in Qatar did. And there's also been a big TV rights row going into the tournament. The European rights were only wrapped up a month ago. Japan, it was, I think, last week, and broadcasters were offering just 1 to 2% in some cases what they offered for Qatar. So what message does that send out? You know, football has a responsibility. It's such a global influencer, and yet that's actually sending out a message that women are not worth the same as men, not just in football, but also in wider society, and their achievements are not being taken seriously.
Siobhan, thank you very much. Our correspondent Siobhan McCall. Well, let's talk now to Yvonne Harrison, who's the CEO of Women in Football. Good to have you with us, Yvonne. This World Cup, probably the most hotly anticipated Women's World Cup ever. Are we, though, nearing the point at which it's on a par with the men's game in terms of popularity and public attention?
It is hotly anticipated, and we've seen it kick off today, which is brilliant, and actually wins for both New Zealand and Australia, which is amazing for them hosting the World Cup. Is it on a par? No. But then when you look at the infrastructure, you look at the investment and the strategic kind of planning around women's football, you know, women's football has been held back, particularly in England, not through any fault of its own. It was banned for 50 years here. So I think, you know, given that the professional league, the Barclays Women's Super League here, only became professional back in 2017, you know, the progress has been rapid, and it's really exciting. And obviously building on the back of the Women's Euros last year, it's phenomenal. So we're seeing there is an audience for it. The talent pool is really high. The standard of football is really great. But I think it can be quite dangerous to compare women's football and men's football in terms of metrics. And maybe actually it's about taking a fresh look and thinking, what should we measure the women's game by? Because it's got a long way to catch up. And, you know, your reporter just talked about salary differences and things like that. Women's football offers a different experience, a different fan experience, a different brand experience indeed, and maybe we should be looking at different measures, but of course ensuring that players are fairly rewarded for their engagement and successes.
Well, let's talk about the money side of things then. Can this buzz that we're seeing around this event translate to more money going into the game, not only wages, but sponsorship deals and wider funding?
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw that on the back of the Women's Euros. If we think about that from an England perspective, you know, season ticket sales for the professional leagues went up, you know, significantly. You actually had a number of brands kind of coming to the table, actually recognising that the women's game does offer something different. I think 1 in 3 fans of women's football are brand new to football. They're not just translating over from the men's game. And that's a real market opportunity for brands. So I think from a sponsorship point of view, we're seeing revenues increase. The important thing is those brands stay. So I think from a world-class event point of view, this is set to be the greatest standalone women's sporting event of all time, and it puts a spotlight on the amazing skill and talented players. It puts a spotlight on the countries that are investing really well, and it's a real opportunity to showcase the game in an unbelievable way, which then will in turn, you know, give more bargaining power to players in terms of salaries, and more pressure on national federations to invest in the women's game, because it's going to grow and they have the power to accelerate that.
Yvonne, good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us today. That's Yvonne Harrison, CEO of Women in Football.
You're watching CGTN, still ahead.
And join me for some swanning about on the river as the annual and very traditional swan count takes place on the River Thames.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. China's Shenzhou 16 mission, made up of 3 astronauts, has just completed its first spacewalk. The space agency says all tasks were completed during the 8-hour walk, including installing and adjusting cameras outside the Tiangong space station. The trio are on a 5-month mission after taking over from their Shenzhou 15 peers at the end of May. They're scheduled to return to Earth in November. Well, let's talk to Dr. Amitabh Ghosh, chair of the Science Operations Working Group for the NASA Mars Exploration Rover mission. Dr. Ghosh, welcome. Good to see you. So the astronauts have just completed their first spacewalk. Just how significant is that?
Well, spacewalk is a very big deal. So just putting it in the fundamental terms, first, the pressure is near zero. So, so the astronauts experience this very, very low pressure. 2 is the astronauts can get, it is either very cold or very hot. So you can get hypothermia or you can get a heat stroke. 3rd is there are micrometeorites. So, if these are going at like 17,000 miles or 20,000 miles, and if even a tiny chip hits you, then it's a very big deal. The pressure creates something in your bloodstream called bends. So, it through your veins. So they have to actually lower the pressure 24 hours before and keep the astronauts somewhere else so that doesn't happen. Then you can get disoriented. And there are astronauts who have gotten disoriented during the spacewalk. Then if the tether, tied to the space station, right? Remember, the space station is moving at about 17,000 miles an hour. So if you get untethered, then it's going to be very tough. So you have to have some form of thing to recover from that. And it's long. It's 8 hours, right? So then, of course, it's very tiring. And you have to prepare a lot. You have to train in the swimming pool, in water, and then train otherwise. So you have to be in top physical shape. It's very difficult.
How important is this milestone for China's space exploration?
So, per se, the spacewalk is a part, but if you scope out and look at the bigger picture, so China now has a space station in place, so that's a very big deal. And this is a very big deal when it relates to manned space flight. So you have a lot of robotic space flight, which is much more easier. So it's much more easier to send robots to space because you don't have to look after them and maintain the temperature and look at life support systems. So this is a very good gauge of how China has mastered the manned spaceflight frontier.
It's a 5-month mission. What other milestones and achievements should we be looking out for that the astronauts are expected to undertake?
So some of it is not that exciting. This is regular engineering housekeeping, but that is very important to keep the space station alive. Then there are science experiments which are being done. So I think there are 1,000 or so total experiments on board the Chinese space station. So they changed the state of the art. For example, there is an experiment from Norway which studies tumor growth in space. It seems that the growth of cancer tumors is different in space than it's in weightlessness than it's on Earth. So, these are things which you don't know, but you might have a serendipitous discovery suddenly, and that might change something on Earth.
Dr. Ghosh, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. Thanks for sharing your expertise.
Thank you, as always.
Iraq has asked Sweden's ambassador to leave and warned it will sever diplomatic ties if the Quran is burned in Sweden again. Hundreds of people stormed the Swedish embassy in the capital, Baghdad, setting it alight in protest against a second planned burning of the Muslim holy book during a demonstration in Stockholm. The Swedish government is considering ratifying a law giving police powers to stop people from setting fire to the Quran in public if it endangers national security. There have been protests in India after video of two women paraded naked and assaulted on a street went viral. It happened in Manipur state, which has been hit by violent ethnic clashes. On Thursday, India's parliament session was disrupted as lawmakers demanded a debate on the issue. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has condemned the assault as shameful. The United States says the DPRK is not responding to its calls or attempts to negotiate the release of a US soldier who crossed into its territory. Private Travis King was with a tour group on Tuesday when he ran across the demilitarized zone from South Korea. Washington says it's working hard to determine King's status and well-being, but there's been no word from Pyongyang on his whereabouts.
Now, it's a custom that dates back to the 12th century. For hundreds of years, representatives of the British royal family have counted the swans along a stretch of the River Thames.
It's known as swan-upping. Its original purpose was to ensure the centrepiece for medieval feasts. These days, the ritual is still carried out, but with conservation in mind. Our correspondent Catherine Drew reports.
This colourful tradition dates from a time when the British Crown claimed ownership of all unmarked swans along the Thames. It's known as swan-upping, and while these swans are no longer counted to ensure a supply for royal feasts, there is a serious purpose: to track the population.
Well, the swan population has been pretty grim, really. It's only half the amount of cygnets so far this week that we've actually caught compared with last year. So it is quite disastrous, really.
Avian flu has had a major impact on the UK's wild birds since the recent outbreak in 2021. This year, experts say there are fewer families with smaller broods.
A lot of pairs have been lost due to the avian flu, but thankfully we're not seeing much of avian flu at the moment. But I would say that it's going to be always there like COVID, and we have to learn to live with it.
River pollution and vandalism have also taken a toll on these birds, while they were also badly affected by spring flooding.
Yeah, mainly because we had a lot of flood water between sort of April and when the birds were starting to nest. Nests get washed away. These are fairly big cygnets, but we have seen some smaller ones. They were probably the result of a second brood where they lost a clutch of eggs first time round.
This is delicate work. The cygnets are still only a few weeks old, and so the parents are very protective. The birds are lifted out of the water and they're weighed and they're measured and also checked for disease and injury.
Now, the young cygnets get tangled in fishing tackle a lot. We do have serious problems with that, because they're not really streetwise like the adult birds. So, you know, we do have a lot of injuries like that. We take them to the swan rescue organisations.
The 5-day census over a 127-kilometre stretch of the river also serves to educate people about these majestic birds. And while there is plenty of swan handling this week, the main message is to leave the swans to enjoy their natural habitat in peace. Catherine Drew, CGTN, Henley-on-Thames.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.